Yeah, they also lose Greg Maven, too, at the other corner. So both corners are wide open. And Josie Jewell is back in the middle, but up front, Jaleel Johnson gone up front. So question marks in the middle there, and a corner, and at the playmaking spots on offense. So, and obviously a quarterback. So that's where I'm at with Iowa.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you look at the simple fact of, like you were saying, how they're more of the old-style Big Ten, bruise them, run them down your throat type deal. And, I mean, it's good and everything, but at a certain point in time, you kind of got to change up in order to be able to run. When you look at it, like, say, the Big 12 and stuff like that, and those guys are running and gunning. I mean, even Michigan, they're starting to change their offense to go more to a spread style. All right. For me, at number 3, I'm going to bring the Nebraska Cornhuskers into this. Now, last year they played pretty decently, except for when they got into Columbus and got wiped out. They're going to have Ohio State come in there. They got a pretty tough schedule. But I think they do kind of have a little bit more talent. I'm not sold on Mike Riley yet. So, I mean, really, you can kind of, in my opinion, move Nebraska and Iowa back and forth. But I just think with, you're losing Tommy Armstrong, who seems like he's been there forever, even though it seemed like he got better after Tim Beck left, in my opinion. But it's just new defensive coordinator, and they don't have the defensive studs in order to be able to hang with a lot of the teams in the Big Ten, in my opinion. Chip.
Well, this is where I'm gonna depart from you fine gentlemen, because this is where I actually looked at Minnesota, and my rationale is quite simply, I think that schedule, when you look at Minnesota's schedule, it really sets up nicely for them to come out of the gates, with a full head of steam, heading into Big Ten season. Buffalo, at Oregon State, Middle Tennessee, Maryland, at Purdue. It's entirely possible they could be undefeated as they go into Big Ten season. Where I think they're going to run out of gas, so to speak, is probably when it goes into the latter part of October, because that's when they travel to Iowa, they travel to Michigan, they've got Nebraska, they're at Northwestern, they've got Wisconsin at home. So I just don't see, for all of the enthusiasm that PJ Fleck is bringing to that program, I just don't see the talent there. The schedule does them no favors. I think Rodney Smith, he falls into that underrated category of running backs that don't get enough hype and publicity. He actually finished second in the Big Ten behind Penn State's Saquon Barkley last year, and he's probably the catalyst for what kind of offense they're going to run. I just think the early part of the schedule allows Minnesota to kind of become into bowl contention, and I think near the end of the season, that's when they're going to they're just going to run out of depth and energy, and that's where they're going to finish third.
How about you, Brett?
So I actually have a tie in second, third spots between Northwestern and Nebraska. But since it looks like we're saving Northwestern for second, I'll wrap up with I'll talk about Nebraska now in a tie there, but we'll claim them third for now. Just for me, Nebraska. I mean, who is Nebraska under Mike Riley? They're 15-11 over 2 years. Just don't really have an identity at all. You look at at least in the Pelini era. They had an identity for a hard-nosed defense, power-based run game with heavy doses of option, mobile quarterbacks. But then again, if you're talking identity, they were known to melt down on the national stage. So you take the good and the bad, right? But Riley's Nebraska just lacks an identity to me, and it looks like finally this season, his third will be a view of his program going forward. It looks like he wants a pocket passer. He finally got one, Tanner Lee. Although we haven't seen much, obviously, game film on him. NFL scouts and analysts are pretty high on him, so that's encouraging. We already talked about Bob Diaco. I think it could be the best coordinator hire in the country coming in this year. You look what he did at Notre Dame a few years back with the Monte Teo year, that defense. Scheme change will definitely hurt. I think that'll be growing pains, but I think he'll compensate with just the overall defensive attitude and technique he brings. So I think they'll net there on defense. But the key thing is they've recruited well above the rest of the division. The only thing we're yet to see them simply out talent anyone though. So we need to start to see the recruiting rankings and hype pay off. Yeah, but I do think, like somebody mentioned earlier here today, I think it is a transition year. Look for 2018 to be that big boost forward when you get a second year at defense, second year with Tanner Lee and all these sophomores, juniors that were high recruits, another year under their belts. That said, I still think it's high enough to be above Minnesota's transition year and above Iowa's transition year, and right in that third spot, or tied for second, actually.
Yeah, when I look at the Nebraska schedule and I look at the Northwestern schedule and talk more about Northwestern here in a minute, I have to give the edge to Northwestern because, I mean, that's a pretty easy schedule, not having to deal with any of the big boys over there in the East except for Penn State. So, I mean, I think they get really lucky in that regard where just as far as, I mean, Nebraska, they got to deal with Ohio State again, and it just seems like whenever they play Ohio State, they get slaughtered, and it takes them a week or two in order to be able to adjust to it. I know they've got some better recruits that came in, especially for wide receiver, so it'll be interesting with their quarterback situation, what direction they go. I'm giving Nebraska the third spot, but that brings us, like you were talking about, Northwestern. I put them in the second. I mean, you've got Justin Jackson. I think he's a really good back. I look at the schedule, and, I mean, it's very, very favorable, in my opinion, to them. I mean, I'll go ahead and let you go ahead, Chip.
Yeah, I have Northwestern second, and Shannon, you alluded to the fact that Northwestern, they don't have to contend with Ohio State or Michigan on their schedule. They actually get Penn State at home on October 7th, the game that I think is going to really kind of chart the course for not just Northwestern, but I think for the Big Ten West is early in the season. It's September 30th when Northwestern goes to Wisconsin. That should be a game that is, even though it's early in the season, is going to have a clear distinction as to which team is going to be the front runner for the Big Ten West, whoever wins that game. You mentioned Justin Jackson. He's definitely an underrated back. He doesn't get nearly the kind of publicity that some of the backs in the Big Ten East get, but he's certainly worthy of national recognition. On the quarterback side, I think Clayton Thorson is an exceptional quarterback. The biggest issue offensively for Northwestern is their offensive line. I mean, they've been giving up tons of sacks. They need to give players like Thorson and Jackson enough time to pass or run. So I think the schedule, it sets up nicely with, they get Penn State at home. They get Michigan State at home. The biggest game that they, in my estimation, that they have is that aforementioned game at Wisconsin on September 30th. But I definitely see Northwestern being a contender in the Big Ten West, which is why I picked them second also.
I'll let you go ahead and do your thing, Brett.
Yeah, so with Northwestern, I mean, just like in life, in college football, timing is everything, right? So under Pat Fitzgerald, they've had years where they had incredibly strong defenses, but the offense would be lackluster, and vice versa, back and forth. Always right around the 7 or 8 win range, but never competed together on both sides. It looks like finally they have top-notch experience and depth coming back on both sides. It's a veteran bunch on offense and defense, and so you know what you're getting talent-wise, and it's been above-average coaching by Fitzgerald to get this program up to where it's at as a contender in the West. So you guys already hit on a lot of these, but Clayton Thorson, definitely a dynamic player. He's improved his pass numbers from freshman to sophomore year. 7 touchdowns, 9 picks his freshman year. Same number of picks, but increased that 7 to 22 touchdowns last year. Unlike most of the Big Ten West, you look at Northwestern as actually a pass to set up the run kind of team. 4th in the Big Ten overall in passing. And then you got Justin Jackson, who's paired together 3 1,000-yard seasons and looks to shatter that school record, probably get a 4th 1,000-yard season. I think O-line is definitely an issue, but I think another issue is a lack of a true number 1 receiver on the outside. They lose Austin Carr, their clutch receiver. Garrett Dickerson's pretty strong there at what they call super back at the tight end spot. But you look at the defense, everything's back. I mean, well, everything that is except for Anthony Walker, who might go down as one of the best linebackers in program history, right there with his head coach Fitzgerald. But because of that loss at middle backer, I think they may flash some 4-2-5 throughout the season. And obviously the key here is their schedule is a major bonus compared to the rest of the division. But they've recruited right around the 50th spot, and when you compare that to Nebraska in the 20s, that's why I'm kind of struggling here with tying them at second. Nebraska, I think, has the higher ceiling, but also the higher floor, more variability in the scheme shift and the quarterback shift. With Northwestern, I think their floor is higher. I don't think they're going to go below third, but I don't see them winning the division either. So I kind of tried to weigh that with schedule and came out with a tie here, Nebraska Northwestern.
Yeah, I think another issue, too, is the linebacker situation, where it sounds like they might be running some kind of different defenses, like a 4-2-5 or something, because they might be lacking in the linebacker department in some regards.
Yeah, definitely. But luckily they missed Ohio State and Michigan, they would really take advantage of that soft second layer there. We'll see how it holds up in the rugged Big Ten West. As we talked about this whole podcast, it's definitely a run first between the tackles division. So if you can't shore up your middle backer area, that could definitely be a red flag.
We're going to go with number one team, which, I mean, everybody says, well, the only reason that this team keeps winning in the West is because the West is weak, but still, you got to win, and you have to have a good program in order to keep winning, and that's Wisconsin. They've got a great system in place. Paul Chryst has come in, done an excellent job with them. I think that, and I was talking to our buddy Joe Dexter of Oh Hail No on our network, and I was talking to him about how I feel that Alex Hornibrook is going to take that step this year, and he's going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the league. Chip, what are your thoughts?
Well, I completely agree. I think Wisconsin, for those of you who may not have seen the preseason polls, Wisconsin, I think, is being in the top 10 is not only deserved. I think the fact that they're not higher, I have every confidence that Wisconsin is going to be one of the top-ranked teams in the country. The schedule sets up nicely. I know they have that game at BYU on September 16th, and that's always a tricky game. We already talked about the Northwestern game. They don't get Ohio State this year. What should be a great game is November 18th. They've got Michigan coming into Wisconsin, and if you recall last year, Wisconsin gave Michigan everything that they could handle and then some. Paul Chryst, say what you will about the guy. He may not necessarily be, Mr. Funny, master of ceremonies when he gets behind the podium, but that guy can coach. And it's obvious that Barry Alvarez did a tremendous service for the University of Wisconsin by bringing him back from Pittsburgh to helm the ship in Madison, because it seems like a continuation of the glory years of Barry Alvarez. Paul Chryst is a very underrated offensive coach. You mentioned Alex Hornibrook. You know full well that Wisconsin's going to have an offensive line that's going to rival Mack trucks just plowing for their running game. I think the schedule sets up tremendously well. I fully anticipate Wisconsin being the Big Ten West representative in Indianapolis the very first weekend in December.
Brett?
Yeah, I completely agree. Definitely the Big Ten West favorites. So Wisconsin hasn't been able to recruit in the top 25 or even the top 40 consistently, but they haven't needed to. Their connections across their home state have built such a strong walk-on pipeline. They're able to compensate and then some for lack of stars and signing day hype. So, I mean, they build a machine, and I think it's going to continue this year. It's built behind an offensive line that every year is big and strong, and you look at it this year, no one is under 6'6", and no one's under 300 pounds. They're all over those metrics. It's a huge bunch up front, and all starters are back. A lot has been said about Corey Clement leaving, but I've been pretty high on Broderick Shaw, who had some glimpses of brilliance last year. I was on that early. I think it was the Georgia State game early in the season. Kind of caught my eye as a young guy. So I think he'll be fine there. They also bring in Chris James, a Pitt transfer. Chris, of course, with Pitt roots. So I think they're going to be fine offensively. Troy Fumagalli is such a good tight end there for Hornibrook to rely on here in the second season. You always see that jump from year one to year two, and I think Hornibrook will make great strides in year two. especially